righty, good afternoon, everybody. How y'all doing? Very good, very good. And as I'm sure you've heard 100,000 times today, welcome to Evolve 2016 here in beautiful Orlando, Florida. And I know it's been quite an informative day, so let's keep the party going. So with us in this session, we have David Shaw and Hemant Sahani, both with AirWatch. And they're going to give you the ins and outs of app configuration for the enterprise. So I'll let them take the floor, guys.
Thank you very much, and I'll say it the 100,001th time, welcome, and thank you for joining this session. This session is about building enterprise-ready mobile apps with AppConfig. My name is Hemant Sahani. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at AirWatch, which is part of VMware, and with me here today is David Shaw, who's the Director of R&D. So what can you expect us to talk about in this session? So we'll start by talking about if you're a developer, which I presume most of you, if not all of you are, you're building enterprise-ready mobile apps. What are some of the challenges you face today? And we'll also look at those challenges from the standpoint of an enterprise IT administrator as well as an end user. In order to solve those challenges, what can AppConfig do for you? And if you're not familiar with AppConfig, don't worry. We'll actually introduce and tell you about what the AppConfig community is and how it can assist you. Then we'll actually, there won't be all talk. We actually have a live Xamarin app that David will actually demonstrate. We'll show you a live demonstration. If you have questions, we can actually dive into the code as well. And our hope is by the end of the session, you're going to want to join the community. So before we end, we will tell you how you as developers or ISVs can actually join the AppConfig community as well. We should have plenty of time at the end to ask questions, so we actually made sure we have that. So let's start with current challenges, if my clicker works over here. All right, so if I'm building enterprise apps, how many people here have actually built apps for enterprises, just by a show of hands? Almost everybody. It's a dumb question at a developer conference. How many people have built an app and multiple versions of that app with different EMM providers? If you're not familiar with EMM, it's an enterprise mobility management or an MDM platform. So about 5 to 10 of you. So let me tell you the story of some of the ISV. For the rest of you who have not had to do that, consider yourself lucky. You probably are building apps within an enterprise where you've picked an EMM provider and you can focus on doing just that. But if you're an ISV vendor that's building an app and you want that app to work with any EMM provider, chances are you have 5 or 6 versions of that app in the App Store. You have a native version that works with native operating system and controls. You have a version that works with AirWatch, another one that works with MobileIron, a third one that works with Citrix, a fourth one that works with Good, a fifth one that works with Microsoft. Before you know it, you're having to maintain 6 different versions of the app. And I'm not even talking about all the EMM providers. I just listed some of the top EMM providers right now. So as a developer, I'm sure you guys all love having multiple code bases for the same app. I know you don't. I also know that you don't like having to learn an SDK or proprietary SDK for 5 different EMM providers. So that is a challenge, and we recognize that today. If you're an enterprise and you locked yourself into a particular EMM, let's say an enterprise only works with MobileIron, well, not every developer is building their app with MobileIron today, right? Not every developer is building their app with AirWatch, for instance. So I don't have all the apps that are available in the native app store. So I'm doing a disservice to my users because I'm not giving them the same level of choice that they have with the native app store. And as a user, I can't tell you how many times I've actually seen a user. Let's say there's this app called ABC on the App Store. There's 6 different versions of it. The user goes to the App Store or Google Play, types in ABC, sees 6 different versions. Obviously, there's a very high likelihood they'll pick the wrong one, and before the developer even has a chance to impress the user with the app, the user will never successfully provision the app because they've picked the wrong version. So these are all real challenges today for people developing apps on different EMM platforms. So what did we do about it, right? We kind of knew these challenges until last year. We wanted to solve them because if something is broken for developers, enterprise IT, and end users, that means we can definitely do something better because it's a lose-lose for everybody up until this point. So what did we do about it? So 4 of the leading EMM providers got together, so AirWatch, MobileIron, IBM, and Jamf, and we created this community called the AppConfig Community. The purpose of the community is simple. We want to accelerate the adoption of mobile in enterprise by letting you use native OS controls, which means as a developer, you don't need 6 versions of your app. You actually build 1 version. It works with all the different EMM providers that are part of the AppConfig community. And I can't really give you names today, but I can tell you that there are other EMMs that will be joining the community pretty shortly as well. So if we look back at our challenges, what are the benefits if you're actually using the AppConfig community? As an enterprise, you don't feel locked into a particular EMM. Everything you're doing actually works across any different EMM. You obviously have a greater selection of business apps. Like I talked about, the developer doesn't really need to build an app 6 times. You don't need to learn 6 different proprietary SDKs. You just use the native OS controls within iOS and Android. And as a user, I truly get an out-of-box experience. And I don't want to steal too much of David's thunder in terms of the demonstration, but you'll see that the business experience with AppConfig is actually better than the consumer experience, because as you're logging into your applications, there's seamless single sign-on. As a developer, when you want to pass dynamic configurations, those can be set within the EMM console where IT cannot make a mistake, and you're not going to lead to support tickets and stuff like that. So let me just do one more slide before we get into the demo. So what exactly does AppConfig provide? So AppConfig basically gives you tools and best practices that you can use on your iOS and Android platform. And they typically fall in one of these 4 buckets. App configuration. So if you have an enterprise app, chances are it needs to point to an app server, a port, there's an email address or a user ID. There could be other things like group codes and so forth. By taking your app, you can actually build key value pairs, and IT can enter those values in the EMM console, and it could dynamically be pushed to that particular enterprise's app. So you don't really need to build a custom version of the app for each enterprise. You have one version of the app, and you can dynamically pass those configurations. If you want to take advantage of security policies and access control, a lot of the EMMs already support things like I can make sure that only devices that are approved, if a company has 1,000 devices, I can import the list of those 1,000 devices and say only those devices are approved to run that application if the corporation wants that level of control. We can also have policies such that if a device is rooted or jailbroken, we can automatically wipe the business data on that device, because you don't want, as an enterprise, you actually want to make sure everything is secure. If you find you've rolled out a particular version of an app and it works on all iOS and Android devices, but later on it never happens, but a vulnerability is found on a particular version of Android on a particular manufacturer's handset, we have level of policies where you can say, for that manufacturer, that handset, on these particular versions of Android or Android OS, I'm actually going to block these applications or block access completely. There's also IT policies you can push out and say, OK, I know 200 users are impacted by that vulnerability. I'm actually going to create a policy saying those users will get a notification saying you can either upgrade your OS in the next 2 days, or I'm actually going to block access to enterprise applications on your device. So fairly sophisticated security policies and access controls are available through the EMM platform. App tunneling. If your app that you're building is accessing business systems that are on-premise, chances are you actually need a way to go and tunnel your traffic either through a VPN or a tunnel. So as an EMM platform, AirWatch, as well as other EMM platforms, can do this automatically. Your app really doesn't even have to write a single line of code to take advantage of that. It just has to be managed by an EMM platform. And single sign-on. So as I said, I won't steal too much of David's thunder, but as an end user, I can get more seamless access to my apps. And as an enterprise, there's higher security. And David will show you a demonstration of using Kerberos as a single sign-on. If you're actually using AirWatch and our identity manager, you can actually take advantage of single sign-on with client certificates on the device. So if an application that supports SAML is trying to authenticate, we can actually check on that particular device if there's a client certificate, does that user has access to that particular application? And if we can do that attestation between the user, device, and that application, the user is seamlessly signed in. That app does not have to be wrapped with any SDK or any app wrapping technology. So I think I've done quite a bit of talking already, so let me hand it over to David, and he's going to wow you with the Xamarin application and a live demo of how it uses the AppConfig. David, take it away.
All right. Let me switch out of here real quick. OK. So my name is David Shaw. I'm Director of R&D Innovation at VMware AirWatch. Today, I'm really excited about showing you guys a real example of a Xamarin app that we built. When we found out that we were coming to Evolve, we brainstormed a little bit about what kind of app we wanted to build. We decided we would build an app that would use iBeacons like this one. We put these in all the conference rooms. The app would check in with these beacons when it locates one. It reaches out to our server, tells which beacon it sees, and then we can map all of the app users on a conference map and see what room they're in. So like a lot of applications, This one needs some configuration, right? We need a server URL. We need to know where we're going to push the data to. We need a username and a password. We need some branding information. All the marketing people told me that. So the problem is, as a developer, entering all this information on the user's first use experience is a bad experience, right? So let's take a quick look at this app. This app is written in Xamarin Forms on iOS. I do want to stress that an Android app would work in a very similar way. The specifics are a little different, but conceptually it's very much the same. So you can see we launched the app here. We see a very typical login screen. It's nothing very exciting. Start by typing in the URL that we got at the registration desk. And you can already see I'm making typos. And it goes on, right? I've already had a bad user experience. I've already got to type in this long thing. I didn't even get halfway through it. I don't remember what my username and password were. This is not the best user experience. So how can AppConfig help us with this problem? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? There we go. Awesome. So the answer is we have some good news. So this device is MDM managed. How many of you guys either have used MDM or at least are familiar with what it is? Show of hands. All right, almost everybody. So for those of you who don't know, Haman kind of leaned into it a little bit, but mobile device management is just a simple, efficient way to manage a fleet of diverse devices from a single admin console. There are a lot of MDM providers, including those in the AppConfig community. We're going to obviously be using AirWatch today for the demo, but know that even though the steps are a little different, the capability is generally equivalent for the stuff that we're showing today across all the MDM providers. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this app, which we had installed, say, from the App Store, and we're going to manage it. And for those of you who don't know how MDM management works on iOS, it's actually a pretty neat protocol. When the user enrolls in MDM, part of that enrollment process involves pushing down a management profile, which among other things contains an endpoint that the device can use to talk to its MDM server. So when an MDM console wants to tell the device to do something, all it does is reach out to Apple and say, send a message to this device, tell it to check in. So we send a message to Apple. Apple sends an APNS, Apple Push Notification Service message, down to the device, telling it to check in. The device reaches out to the MDM server, gets the commands, and executes them. It's really pretty straightforward. So the first command that we're going to send it is to manage this app. Now, essentially what we should see here is a request on the device to be managed. So you can see we're trying to take management of the AppX Finder. This is a feature that was added in iOS 8, I believe, that we can take control of an app that's already installed. It used to be that you could only push down apps, but you can actually take control of apps that have already been pushed. Now, we're going to go ahead and do that. And I want to kind of talk a little bit about what happened there as a result of that. AppConfig, in addition to managing an app, also lets you push down key value pairs as a configuration to an app. And when we just manage this app, part of what we did is push down this configuration. So you can see here we're pushing down a server name, that long URL that I couldn't really remember. We're pushing down the username, which you notice is a macro. AirWatch and I presume other MDM providers have integrations with various Active Directory and other authentication mechanisms. So we have a bunch of different macros that you can use to fill in data that is unique to that user, to identify that user, to configure for that user. So in this case, we're pushing down the username. We're also pushing down a bunch of branding information. And there's an auth type there, which we'll kind of get back to in a minute. So now that we've pushed this configuration down, let's launch the same app again. And you can see, now the app is branded. The server URL has already been entered for us. The username has been resolved from that macro to the username that we enrolled with. And all we have to do is enter the password and start. I think everybody would agree this is a little better. As a first use experience, I'm much more likely to be able to just remember my password than all that other stuff. Now, this isn't all of what we need, though. If you're an enterprise, typically you don't have just one app, right? You might have 1, 5, 10, 20. In the keynote, we saw some companies have 50 apps they've developed in-house. And that means 50 login screens, 50 sets of code that authenticate. And of course, we're all using code reuse, and we're using NuGet packages and submodules and whatnot to try to reduce code use. But we also know that if you have 50 apps, you have 50 teams managing that. It's up to those 50 to deal with security issues that are found, make sure they're pulling the latest releases. It's a problem. So I think we need to do a little better. So how can we do that? And that's sort of where we get into single sign-on and identity management. And I want to stress that AppConfig will work with almost every identity management provider that's out there. In the demo today, we're using Workspace ONE with the VMware Identity Manager, and it's a really awesome product, but whatever identity manager your company uses probably works with AppConfig. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our authentication type here from password to SAML. And this key has special meaning in my application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push those settings down. Oops, missed. In my application, when I change that value, it's telling it instead of using the content page with the login screen, it's using a content page with a web view. And that web view is going to authenticate against the URL that was passed in the app config. And when it completes, it's going to call back with a SAML callback and let me know that everything worked and that I can or cannot log in. And the neat thing is, because this application and this device are MDM enrolled, I can also make use of a Kerberos certificate that was also pushed down as part of this application. I'm going to show you guys a little bit of the code in a second on that, but essentially what we're going to do here when we launch the app, in addition to instead of just logging in, we're going to authenticate, we're going to get a callback, we're going to seamlessly log into our application. And again, one thing that's really cool about this is you can use web views, you can use Safari View Controller on iOS, you can use Chrome custom tabs on Android, you can use PCL with modern HTTP client on the back end, OAuth tokens, everything is supported. And as you noticed, we didn't type in a username, we didn't type in a password. The backend server knows who we are. You can see the beacon is working, at least this one is. And we've seamlessly authenticated and logged into the app. So I think that's pretty awesome. And the other thing that's really cool about this is because we're using identity management on our mobile and on our desktops and on our tablets, you get the same login for mobile apps, for desktop apps, for web apps. If you guys use Jira, if you use Confluence, if you use Stash, if you're using any of these tools to manage your build systems, if you use Jenkins, if you use Bamboo, same login across all these applications. So it's a consistent experience for the developer and for the end user. So I'm going to switch over to some code here for a second. Hopefully that's readable. I want to stress really quickly that as a developer, the work that's required to, not that one, give me a second. The work that's required to actually, it's really small on here. All right, here we go. So, my apologies. All right, so let's see here. So right here, this is code that we've directly translated from iOS to Xamarin. The key, com.apple.configuration.manage, is a key that's specified by Apple. All you have to do is read NS user defaults, standard defaults, and your keys are pushed down into that dictionary. And the cool thing is, because this is managed at the OS level, because this is native, this is not part of my app doesn't need to be running for this to be set. If the user kills the app and we push these settings down, they will still be there when the app launches next time. And the way this app works, we've got a little bit of additional neat stuff there. If you look right below that, we've got a set defaults observable method where we are observing when the NS user defaults change. So if the configuration comes down while the app is running, we can also take those settings in real time and apply them to the application. So I'm going to show you real briefly the way we're doing the branding on that. If you look, oh, that's not the right one, right here. So if you look, we've got some values in our resource dictionary These are the default values. We've got some styles that apply these values as dynamic resources. And then essentially what happens is when the configuration is applied, essentially what we do is we go through and we update the resources to take those values. And because they're dynamic resources, they're applied throughout the UI. Anything that's taken those styles automatically takes them, which is really cool. Now, one of the things that I have heard from people is, let me show you this. Back to the set of key value pairs. People say, well, my IT administrator is going to screw this up, right? They're not going to type the right keys in. They're going to put the wrong case and the wrong everything. So that's a problem. And the solution to that is a little different on Android and iOS. On Android, with Android for Work, you actually include a XML file as part of your application. And your MDM console will read that file, and when you upload the IPA file, or I'm sorry, when you upload the binary for either from the Play Store or directly to your console as a local app. But on iOS, there is no ability to include that in there. So what you can find on the AppConfig website is a XSD file that all of the MDM providers have agreed on. So you can create an XML file that validates against this XSD. You upload the XML file to your console. It will automatically fill it out with all of the correct keys that your application supports. I can show you guys the XSD. That's what But essentially, you can download this XSD. You can validate your XML file against it. Make sure that only values that you want to support in your application are there. You upload the XML file to your MDM console, and it will auto-populate. You have validation. You can do regular expressions to make sure that the values are in the range that you want, of the types you want. There's options. You can specify only a certain set of options. And all of those things will be applied in the UI in your MDM console for you automatically. So I think that's really a neat way to make sure that not only is the work of the developer better, not only is the work of the end user who wants to use your application better, but the IT administrator's job is a little bit easier too. So I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint here real quick and talk about one other thing. Okay, so most people who have been doing enterprise development with an MDM provider have been doing it using a software development kit. Haman kind of talked about some of the pain with that. And so really we kind of wanted to talk about under what circumstances do you need a software development kit, right? Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes you really need one. And so really kind of what we want to talk about is if the device is not managed, then an SDK is the way to go. If the device is managed, you should start with AppConfig and switch to an SDK only if you find that you need it. But AppConfig should be your starting point for all your managed devices. Now, there are cases where you're going to do some more advanced things outside, even in a managed environment where you're going to want to use an SDK. A good example of that is the AirWatch SDK supports a shared clipboard between applications that is digital loss protection. Make sure that you can only copy and paste between your managed apps and not outside of those managed apps. You can't do that with AppConfig, but you can certainly do it with an SDK. There are other examples too. If you guys want to swing by our booth, I'd be happy to kind of go over some of the pros and cons with you, but definitely give AppConfig a try. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Hemant. He's kind of going to go through how you guys can get involved in the AppConfig community. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Hopefully that was interesting for you guys to see an actual Xamarin app using AppConfig in action. You were able to see how you apply dynamic configuration. We showed you single sign-on. Those key value pairs are your own to define. There's a schema file, and you'll see more and more tools and best practices that we bring to you. So we launched this in February at MWC, and we've already had over 60 ISV partners that are part of AppConfig today. And that includes some pretty big names like Salesforce, SAP, Workday, Oracle, Box. And if you guys aren't aware of the history of AppConfig, AppConfig was actually launched last year as something called ACE, AppConfig for Enterprise. There were 4 founding members at the time. It was AirWatch, Xamarin, Cisco, and Box. And what we realized was we really needed a cross-EMM community. And even though these EMMs, AirWatch, MobileIron, IBM, Jamf, we compete with each other in order to solve for the lives of developers, end users, and IT, we really needed to collaborate and provide these tools and best practices. So I'm sure you guys are wondering, if you want to participate, what's the next step? So I'll show you that. Clicking the wrong way. Thank you, David. So as a developer, if all you want to do is learn about what are the tools and best practices, if I have a question, where can I go and ask the question? All you have to do is go to appconfig.org/join. There is, in that join button, there's actually a link to a group. You join the group, and you have access to basically all the developers that are part of any of these EMM platforms. We also have very strong relationships with Apple and Google. So everything that we're actually proposing as a standard and best practice has already been worked out with Apple and Google. If you go to the Apple developer pages for enterprise, they actually link back to the AppConfig community. So this is not stuff that EMMs are doing in isolation. It's actually done along with the OS providers. They have members that are also monitoring these groups and actually help answer those questions that we're not able to answer for you. If you're an ISV provider, you'd like to use the AppConfig logo in your application, you can do that. So the way to do that is very simple. You go read up on the Dev Center what are all the different things your app needs to do. There's a process by which you can go and self-certify your app, and once that's done, you can go download the logo and start using that in your marketing collateral. And then if you'd like your app to be published as part of a partner app on the appconfig.org website, that's pretty simple as well. All we want to make sure is you've actually tested your app end-to-end against one EMM platform, because once you've tested against one, it will work across all the EMMs that work with AppConfig. So the way to do that is, again, on that same join page, there are 4 links. You can work with AirWatch, MobileIron, IBM, or Jamf. Any of them will actually help you set up an environment. That environment will help you take your app, certify end-to-end that your app works through the entire life cycle. And then once you're done and you've self-certified, you basically tell us, and we'll put your app icon along with your marketing collateral on the AppConfig website. So hopefully this is interesting and this session was useful to you. If you want to learn more, it's very easy, appconfig.org. You can access it from your mobile devices or any device you choose. We're going to hang around here for a little bit. We'll take a few questions live. I know sometimes people have specific questions for their applications, so we do have a booth for AirWatch, very close to where you picked up your good case. Those are pretty nice cases. If you haven't ordered, you should. But we're very close to that booth if you have questions about AppConfig. So any questions that people want to ask here in the live forum? Please.
Is this working? Okay. Using AirWatch, in order to implement the AppConfig, do we need to have the AirWatch per app VPN tunnel in place as well in order to open a tunnel?
So the way it works is you can use per app VPN with any MDM provider. So if you basically are creating your app, let's say you provide your app to customer A, that customer could be using AirWatch. When they deploy that app, they can actually configure the app to say, use per app VPN for this set of managed applications. Customer B deploys the same application with MobileIron. They can actually specify that in the MDM software. So as an app developer, you don't have to do anything to accomplish that. Other questions? Feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I'm wondering with, you're mentioning like the copying to the clipboard, you might need an SDK or some sort of wrapping solution for that. Are you working with Apple and Google to get those type of capabilities into the operating system so that we don't need to use SDKs for those as well?
Yeah. So like Hemant said, we do have a really good relationship with Apple and Google. We work with them on a regular basis to try to increase the capability in the EMM space within AppConfig. It's always sort of up in the air as to what they're actually going to take, but absolutely we do work with them and we do make recommendations of things that we feel like the EMM community could benefit from.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, these groups that we have where all of you as developers can participate and ask questions, there are people from both Apple and Google monitoring those. If you see some of the enterprise capabilities that were launched in iOS 8 and 9, they were a direct result of the EMMs going to Apple and Google saying, we are having to build this one-off. We would love for this to be part of the platform, and that's how some of these security and configuration capabilities, more and more of those are actually being absorbed by the platform layers themselves.
Yeah. Another good example of that, somebody came to our booth yesterday and asked if you could push down manage applications in a folder. And it did not used to be true that you could do that, but we actually, very recently in an iOS release, it was like 9.3 or 9.3.1 or something, that capability was added, and it can be done now. And that's a good example of, you know, customers talking to their EMM vendors working with Apple to make that happen.
Right. So yeah, the use case, the where that came from was we had a retail customer that said, I have a device, I'd like to push 5 applications, but I want to group them together and show in one particular folder, and I want to show that consistently across all the 10,000 kiosk devices we have. So, you know, we brought that requirement to Apple, and Apple was able to basically accommodate and make that part of the, I think it was a 9.x release, I forget exactly which one. Other questions?
Do you know what the plan is to support this for Windows Phone?
Support for Windows Phone?
Is that the question? I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear
you. Do you have any plans for, or does Microsoft have plans for supporting this type of technology in Windows Phone?
Yeah, so right now AppConfig is supported on iOS and Android. We would love to support something similar for Windows and Windows Phone. So probably if we were to start, we would start with Windows 10, the universal app concept, since there's a lot more that Microsoft has to offer there, and then, you know, go back to, you know, Windows Phone. I'm not sure we'll start with Windows Phone 7 first. It'll probably be 8, since those are very different architectures, as you know. But we would love to explore that. Right now, the focus, since as I mentioned, we just launched in February, started the launch with iOS. The Android launch, a soft launch has happened, but you'll actually see at Google I/O, there'll actually be a much bigger launch of AppConfig. And then we would love to work with Microsoft and do more things over there. Other questions?
If you're an ISV and you have multiple corporate customers, where do they go, or who administers these credentials or these properties? Is it one central place, or is that multi-tenant? How's that partitioned among your customers?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is it depends. You know, in the case of AirWatch, we have cloud and on-prem, and it really depends on how that customer decided to deploy their application. You know, I think in our case, you know, the majority of our customers are using our cloud solution, but we do have a significant minority that do on-prem. And typically, regardless of where the installation physically is located, it's still managed via a web console, just like we showed in the demo. And, you know, the apps would be uploaded and managed that same way, regardless of where it's actually hosted.
And you can have a multi-tenant instance in the cloud, or you can have a private instance. It's all up to the organization, what sort of risk posture do they have, you know, what's their adoption towards cloud and so forth. So it's fairly flexible, and most EMMs would offer all of those solutions today.
Hi, as a developer of a Xamarin application, do you have any best practices or advice for incorporating multi-factor authentication into our applications in a way that's compatible with AirWatch as well as other MDMs?
Yeah, I mean, so sort of the answer to that is yes. And part of what we're trying to do with AppConfig is to provide not just best practices, but also sample applications and some open source examples. Hopefully those are coming in the coming weeks. Keep your eye on the AppConfig website. We'll have hopefully Xamarin Forms apps, Xamarin Android apps, Xamarin iOS apps that all sort of give concrete code examples of the best way to do per app VPN, the best way to do AppConfig settings, you know, the best way to take advantage of single sign-on. So hopefully those will be coming in the coming weeks.
And if I can just throw a plug here for VMware Workspace ONE, if your app supports SAML, and the customer is using VMware Workspace ONE with VMware Identity Manager, your app doesn't have to do any more work than that. Your app just has to support SAML. We can support single sign-on, like David showed. We can support single sign-on with certificates installed on the device. We can also do two-factor authentication with RSA. I mean, AirWatch is part of VMware, which is part of EMC, which owns RSA, so we have some fairly tight integration with RSA two-factor authentication. And as I mentioned, SAML is a fairly open standard. Once you support SAML, we can actually do a lot of things like magic. So as a developer, you don't have to worry about anything else. The console and the platform can handle the rest for you. But as David said, we'll have code samples and a lot of best practices listed on the websites for you, so you can actually take advantage of those. Anyone else? No? All right. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. I know there were 4 other sessions, and you chose this one. Hopefully, it served your purpose. As I mentioned, David and I will also stick around for a few more minutes, or you can find us at the AirWatch booth. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.